This is really exciting for me. As Emmanuel mentioned, about 2 years ago, I was privileged to participate in one of these institutes, and I understand how interesting and informative it can be. And I have friends from that 1 week session that I still keep in contact with today throughout the world. So, this is a fantastic opportunity for you to make connections and really understand perspectives of your colleagues around the world. I also understand that everybody is operating in different time zones and that some of you may be very sleepy because it's late at night, and some of you may be very sleepy because it's early in the morning. For me personally, I'm joining you from Atlanta, Canada, in Halifax, Nova Scotia. It's the traditional unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. For me personally, I am 4 hours ahead of Victoria, so we're just encroaching on dinner time here. So I apologize in advance if my stomach grumbles maybe a little loudly, more loudly than I would like. I'm going to share my screen to walk through what we're going to do for the next couple of hours. I am a complete Zoom seminar newbie. So if I don't see your hand or if you're putting something in the chat and I'm not recognizing it, please just yell out. This can be a completely informal conversation for the next few hours. I'm excited to exchange views with you and maybe share a little bit of my experiences from the Canadian situation. So here's how we're going to spend the next few hours together. Since we're all coming from this topic with a few different backgrounds and experiences, I'd like to start with a bit of a level set just by introducing myself and the community of customs brokers that I represent currently. We'll place that information within the broader context of the trade community and examine at a high level some of the challenges that arise when customs and trade communities interact. Throughout our discussion, I'd like to anchor those challenges in a current Canadian example, which is the implementation of the CBSA Assessment and Revenue Management System, or CARM. You had some background information on CARM in your reading materials. Basically, it's a multi-year IT initiative that is intended to streamline the process of accounting and payment for imported goods. Unfortunately, it's run into a number of implementation challenges and delays, and it's a timely example of the challenges that arise when the customs and trade relationship is less than ideal. I just want to preface this by saying it will come out in the context of this presentation as though I'm pointing out the flaws in the way that customs works. That's not necessarily my intent. It's only by looking at what's not working well that we can better discuss what could work more effectively in the future. So by no means take this as a session on bashing Canadian customs or suggesting that the government is all bad and trade is all good. There's flaws on both sides of the process. There's absolutely opportunities to do things better all along the way. So please don't take any of my comments as a suggestion that I'm somehow suggesting that my former employer, who I loved working with for 24 years, is not doing their job correctly. It's just a challenge of the relationship and the operating context that we work in. We'll take a 20-minute break at some point along the way. Then we'll come back and look at how to address some of the challenges that we will discuss in the first part of this seminar. We're also going to look at the World Customs Organization's theme for 2024, which is customs engaging new and traditional partners with purpose. And we'll look at how that can lay the foundation for effective customs and trade collaboration. More specifically, we'll talk about the national committee, how on national committees for trade facilitation can be made to work as envisioned in the World Trade Organization's Trade Facilitation Agreement. If any of you have experiences in your own regions where customs and trade collaboration worked well, or maybe didn't work so well, I'd love to take the opportunity to share those during our time together. And finally, we'll close out our seminar with a question and answer session. I'm not sure we're going to take the full 3 hours this afternoon, but we will see how things go. Please feel free to jump in at any time with questions or comments. As a learner myself, I prefer dialogue to being lectured at, and I think we'll all have more fun in this session if we take the opportunity to hear from one another rather than listening to me drone on all afternoon. That said, when you make your intervention, please just remind me who you are and where you're from. I did take some notes, but I may have missed a few details about your specific experiences in this world. Are there any questions or comments before we get started? Perfect. All right. So my hope is that you're going to come away from this session with a few helpful perspectives as you encounter customs and trade cooperation in your own countries and regions. We're going to discuss a Canadian example to anchor our learnings in real life. But the challenges and opportunities we'll cover today are relevant in all contexts where customs and trade need to interact in support of shared goals. The WCO has provided guidance on customs trade collaboration for years, and you have one example in your course readings. The World Trade Organization emphasizes cooperation between governments and the trade community as such an important thing that it built it right into the Trade Facilitation Agreement. It is in everyone's interest to develop and maintain functional, effective relationships between the parties that are involved in moving goods across borders. So, if nothing else, my hope is that you're going to come away from today's session with a better understanding of the complexities of the customs and trade communities and how simple assumptions and misunderstandings on either side can quickly lead to a broken relationship. It's equally important, though, to recognize that those misunderstandings can be resolved and that there are tools and guidance available to help all countries and regions develop more effective relationships between customs and its trade organizations. So by now, you may have figured out that I'm a bit of a collaboration cheerleader. It's because I've worked on both sides of the customs trade relationship, and I've seen firsthand the great things that can be accomplished when we work well together, as well as the really painful circumstances that result when we don't. I'm currently the president of the Canadian Society of Customs Brokers, which is a not for profit organization in Canada that represents the interests of customs brokers. We have more than 200 members, and in a few minutes, I'll tell you a little bit about our organization and about the role of customs brokers in Canada. Before I joined the CSCB, I worked for 24 years with the Canadian government, and almost all of that time was spent with Canada's Customs and Immigration Agency, which is called the Canada Border Services Agency, or CBSA. You have a few colleagues in your class who belong to the CBSA. I had the same employer for 24 years, but that doesn't mean I did the same job for all of that time. I started my career in the intelligence world, focused mainly on national security and preventing the spread of technologies that could be used to develop weapons of mass destruction. I joined the CBSA from the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, or CSIS, which is Canada's intelligence agency. CSIS works closely with Canadian customs to ensure that our country is not used as a source or transit country for goods or technology that can be used to develop nuclear, chemical, or biological weapons or their delivery systems. After the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001, our work took on increased emphasis on ensuring those types of materials did not make their way into the hands of terrorist groups such as Al Qaeda or later Islamic State. I transferred from CSIS to the CBSA about 9 months after the September 11th attacks and spent several years in CBSA headquarters providing program direction to intelligence officers in the field who were responsible for identifying goods and people entering or leaving Canada that might be of concern in relation to terrorism or weapons transfer. During that time, I was part of the Canadian delegation to the Wassenaar Arrangement and the Missile Technology Control Regime, where we worked with colleagues from other nations to control the spread of small arms and missile-related technology. After several years in CBSA headquarters, I became a regional intelligence officer in CBSA's Pacific region, which consists of the province of British Columbia and the Yukon Territory. It includes Vancouver Island, which is the location of the University of Victoria and where the Borders and Globalization Institute is physically located. Terrorism and national security issues continued to find me, so to speak, during this part of my career, but my actual portfolio is related to contraband tobacco. Canada had and continues to have a problem with cigarettes and other tobacco products coming into the country illegally to evade duties and taxes. Just to make things more colorful, I also added outlaw motorcycle gangs to my file responsibilities. I still had the same employer, but it definitely wasn't the same job. I returned to CBSA headquarters a few years later, where I was responsible for marine security intelligence. This version of my job focused partly on terrorism, particularly the idea that terrorists or weapons could be smuggled to North America in a shipping container. It also focused on smuggling and detecting and disrupting the wide variety of ways that smugglers can conceal drugs, weapons, or other contraband on vessels and in containers or break bulk shipments. My next stop was Washington, D.C., where I was the CBSA's intelligence liaison officer at the Canadian Embassy. Once again, national security and terrorism issues managed to find me. During my posting, the so-called underwear bomber, Umar Farouk Abdulmutallab, unsuccessfully tried to ignite a bomb in his undergarments on a flight to Detroit. Other terrorists tried to send bombs concealed in printer cartridges via express parcel. And another terrorist, Faisal Shahzad, tried to detonate a car bomb in Times Square in New York and was arrested when he attempted to catch a flight out of JFK Airport. Those were busy times. Again, same employer, not the same job. After Washington, it was back to CBSA headquarters in Ottawa, where I was Chief of Staff to the Director General of Intelligence and Enforcement. This was a great opportunity to see firsthand the complex interactions between the intelligence programs and other parts of the CBSA. We were one organization, but often had divergent views on the same situation, and different business lines had different priorities. As a diehard intelligence officer, it was hard for me to see how border wait times or product labeling requirements could possibly be more important than detecting gun or drug smugglers at the border. The department was also going through a period of fiscal restraint and downsizing, and I was amazed to see that entire programs and initiatives could be shut down for the sake of budget savings. I did another tour of duty with CBSA in the regions, this time as the manager of a regional intelligence team in Southern Ontario, where much of the Canada-United States border is a waterway, either one of the Great Lakes or a connecting river. Have any of you ever worked in a frontline operation as a customs inspector, an immigration officer, or some other type of border services officer? I think when I took my notes, Hamza in Morocco, you are a border services officer. Paula from Argentina, I believe as well, and Huberto from Peru. Were there any others that I missed?
Hi, Janine, it's Lauren. I started my career in Windsor, Ontario as a border services officer
Very
and worked
good.
there for 9 years. Yeah.
Perfect. So you've seen a little bit of everything at the Detroit Windsor border crossing.
Yeah, Windsor, Ottawa for a few years and then out in Prairies.
Perfect. Anybody else have sort of that frontline experience, either customs, immigration, some other frontier control? No, no problem. So the next question is a bit of a loaded question. When you're in the regions, for those of you that are frontline officers, what did you think of your headquarters counterparts while you were occupying that frontline role? Lauren, I'm going to pick on you. What did you think headquarters was up to while you were in Windsor?
Well, when I was at BSO in Windsor, you think that they don't really understand what it is that you're doing. And that's why I ended up requesting to go on an assignment in Ottawa, because I wanted to see for myself, essentially, what was going on.
For sure. Hamza, what is it like in Morocco? Do you have much interaction? Do you have a separation between the regions and headquarters?
Yes, well, currently, as I said, I work in the front line between Morocco and Spain. So I think that in our case, there's an interesting collaboration between Spanish authorities, customs authorities, and Moroccan customs authorities, exchange of intelligence as well as information about the traffic, about any kind of risk. I think that this facilitates the customs operation in both ways. So this is the case for the frontier in Morocco and Spain.
Thank you, Hamza. And Paula, I see you came on screen.
Yeah. In my career, I could experiment personally quite well the experience of the Italy-Switzerland frontier, especially as regard, Western Italy, so Ponte Chiasso and going westward. When I can see that this separation, headquarters and operational offices is quite relevant. And they are busy offices where it is quite difficult to keep up with these complex procedures. And so maybe custom officer feels just maybe, how can I say, abandoned by headquarters somehow. Okay.
Yeah, that's a very good word, abandoned, and or feeling that they are sort of two different universes, not operating together. I know from my own perspective, for me and many of my regional colleagues, we mostly thought people from headquarters were from another planet. Even though I myself had done multiple tours between headquarters and the regions, when I was in a regional role, I bought into the idea that those people, if you use your air quotes, those people in headquarters had no idea what we were doing. We saw that certain laws and policies were completely outdated and made no sense. And we couldn't understand, like, why couldn't they just hurry up and fix things? Like, why did it take so long? And surely it could not be that hard. So in 2018, I decided to find out for myself, and I left the intelligence and enforcement world to embark on a new adventure in policy development for the CBSA. And that's where I learned, honestly, yes, it really is that hard to make changes to law and policy. The number of people that are involved in the process and the number of different program and policy centers that need to be consulted mean that seemingly simple changes can actually take years. And it was quite astounding to find this out. If you add in at the high level for legal changes, the idiosyncrasies of politics and election cycles and the shifting sands of government and public priorities, it truly is incredible that anything gets done at all. So I had the same employer throughout this entire time, but again, I was not doing the same job. Now, just in case you are starting to get the sense that this is 3 hours of me talking about myself, all of this prattling on has a bit of a point. I was very fortunate to be able to see many parts of my organization during my time with the CBSA. Through each of my experiences, I was exposed to different perspectives and priorities among units and sections that were all, in theory, working for the same employer. The leadership of each business line had a solid idea of the so-called right approach to any given situation. But if their perspective differed significantly from the views of the leadership in another business line, it was very hard to make and implement decisions. Generally, none of the perspectives was wrong. Each just reflected a different set of priorities and concerns that related to different aspects of the customs business. In my current role in the private sector, I often hear references to customs. So customs is out to lunch. Customs doesn't understand how trade works. Customs is out to get the broker community. Customs is only focused on taxes or on drug smuggling or on intellectual property rights or whatever the topic may be. From my viewpoint, there is no one customs. Customs organizations all over the world are charged with delivering a wide variety of legislative and program priorities, usually based on an anchoring piece of legislation that relates to duties and taxes. This foundational law or laws is accompanied by a wide swath of acts and regulations that customs administers or enforces on behalf of other government departments. So in Canada, the CBSA is responsible for enforcing more than 90 pieces of legislation. You can see that complexity embodied in the CBSA mandate, which says that the CBSA is responsible for providing integrated border services that support national security and public safety priorities and facilitate the free flow of persons and goods, including animals and plants, that meet all requirements under the program legislation. That's quite a bowl full of responsibilities to deliver on. You may have heard my former CBSA colleague, Hubert Duchesneau, discussing the CBSA's mandate with you in more detail during this morning's session. So customs organizations in other countries face similar levels of complexity in delivering on their responsibilities. In that context, it's unrealistic to expect that any organization will have a single, simple response to managing trade and complex border operations. A failure to understand that complexity is one of the key reasons for challenges in the customs and trade relationship. Have any of you ever experienced any challenges in the misunderstanding between customs and private industry or the trade?
May I?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so it's actually very common, and as you already said that many a times the authorities and the trade are working in the silos, and the perspectives on the both sides are missing. So sometimes what the notification are brought out by the government are not in line with the facilitation measures with the trade, or sometimes these are in a way which are causing disruption in the trade. And one good example I would like to share here that we have introduced many such things like some of the documents that can be uploaded through web-based facility. And if there is a bottleneck in uploading or the glitch in the system or hand holding is missing, then these are some of the things that feels that it is anti-trade facilitation also. And sometimes what we are thinking that it could be good in the overall trade running, but the trade faces different way. But at the same time, with the perspective of Indian customs, I would say that there is a continuous meeting every quarterly CCFC, we said, customs facilitation committees meeting, where trade and customs both comes together, and these kind of issues are discussed and taken back to the table for the correction measures. So that happens, but yes, we need meetings on such topics.
Yeah, absolutely, Priti. That's
Yeah,
a great
thank you.
example.
Yeah.
And it is very much the case where one side will feel that they're communicating clearly, and it's not being understood, or it's not resonating with the other community in the same way. And it's not intentional, but it's just the way it works out. Paula, I see you have your hand up as well.
If I may share, just comment, when you talked about misunderstanding, I think that they happen unluckily quite often. If I may share an example, I worked in a directorate, basically competent for all Northwest Italy, which was subject last year to a general reorg. Okay, and basically this created, how can I say, perplexities among stakeholders who felt worries, concerns about how local offices were supposed to be reorganized, and if there was, the risk for local offices to lose importance, and so for local brokers to lose, businesses and stuff. And so flows of communications were uneasy to manage because, anyway, all these concerns just flow very rapidly. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's sort of, we'll discuss that a bit more in the next little while. But when you have this idea that customs or that trade is one cohesive organization instead of many parts organized and moved together, whenever there's an internal reorganization in customs or in any kind of trade association, it can be very confusing for the other party to understand what has changed, why it has changed, who they need to talk to. And that definitely creates a lot of friction in the relationships, for sure. Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it. I think there's another angle on this as well. So it's important for the trade community to understand the complexity of the customs mandate. Like, customs is not just one big block where everybody does the same work and acts in exactly the same way and has exactly the same motivations. But it's also important for customs themselves to understand when they're kind of letting their own organizational complexity get in the way of effective operations or program administration. So in Canada, we have an example right now that we're dealing with where we have one issue that involves multiple parts of the Canada Border Services Agency. But each of those parts of the organization doesn't feel that they can work together to produce a consolidated response. So just for a bit more context, we in the industry are looking for some written guidance from the CBSA about how they're going to approach liability for customs brokers while there are some interim processes in place as they unfurl this new IT system called CARM. So without getting into the weedy details, the CBSA is recommending that customs brokers take on some responsibility for transactions on behalf of importers during a transition period, just to sort of keep the implementation going so that there's not a complete stoppage of transactions while importers try to take the steps they need to take in order to become aligned with the new system. So that isn't all that different than what's happening currently. Often customs brokers do take on transactions on behalf of importers, and we'll discuss that in a few minutes. But what is different is that there's a change to Canadian law on the horizon that could have a bit of an impact. So lurking in the background of this situation is an amendment to the Customs Act that's not yet enforced, but which would assign liabilities for duties and taxes to whichever entity used their business number on the accounting information, not just the importer or owner of the goods, which is the way the law works currently. If this change to the Customs Act comes into effect, it would include the customs broker as one of the parties that would be liable for duties and taxes for goods if they use their business number on the documentation. So to allow the IT system CARM to be implemented as intended, the CBSA is seeking to have customs brokers use their business number on behalf of importers during a transition period of about 12 months, just to allow everybody to tick all of the boxes that are required to get everybody fully on board with the system. But there are concerns in the customs worker community that this legislative amendment is going to come into effect and it will be applied retroactively. So what customs workers might do right now with the goal of facilitating trade and helping out importers could in effect come back to bite them 3 or 4 years down the road if there's liability assigned to transactions they did during the transitional period. Now, the CBSA has said verbally that they will not do that, that they won't apply the law retroactively once it comes into effect. And so industry is just looking for the government to put that in writing to confirm what they have heard verbally a number of times. But what we found currently is that because the organization of CBSA is so compartmentalized, it's very difficult to get 3 different areas to put approvals on the same piece of written documentation. So each of the sections is choosing instead to say, well, we would rather just sign off on this one portion of the solution, and this other part of the CBSA is going to have to sign off on this other portion of the solution, and this other part is going to have to sign off on this third part of the solution, but we can't give you one consolidated response. Now, from an industry perspective, that's not satisfying because it sounds like you would be giving guarantees by one part of the CBSA only to have them taken away by another part of the CBSA. So as much as it's important for trade to recognize that there is complexity in the organization, there is complexity in the customs business, and you can't expect one single answer every time, it is also incumbent on customs organizations to look for ways where they can advance that cooperation with trade by trying to provide clear and concise and cohesive advice whenever the possibility exists to do so. So I bet you thought we were done talking about me, right? Well, almost, but not quite. So as I mentioned, I'm currently the president of the Canadian Society of Customs Brokers, which is a not-for-profit organization that I joined about a year ago. The CSCB represents more than 200 customs brokers in Canada. Unlike the United States and some other countries, Canada licenses a brokerage firm rather than a particular individual. So if you were trying to compare the number of customs brokers in your country compared to what is in Canada, it may not be an exact comparison. For example, in the United States, they license individuals as customs brokers, not companies. So it may seem like we have a very small number, but it's particularly due to the differences in our licensing regimes. So the CSCB participates constructively in collaboration with the CBSA and other government departments to contribute our community's perspectives to government decision-making. We also offer professional development and education, including designations. So we offer a certified customs specialist and a certified trade compliance specialist designation, which are both recognized throughout Canada's supply chain industries as evidence of an advanced level of education on the roles and functions of customs brokers in Canada. Several years ago, we also assisted the United States in implementing their own version of the Certified Customs Specialist program. So while the two countries have taken somewhat different paths as the years have advanced, we started out with the same program, which was based on the Canadian Certified Customs Specialist program. Does anybody know what a customs broker does?
May I?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Okay. So Preeti from this side. So customs brokers are supposed to file the documents for clearance of the customs cargo. And on behalf of importer, they are supposed to pay the duties as well, which is reimbursed to them by the importer. They are supposed to be the law compliant as per the land of the law for any goods which is being imported. And in fact, to the extent that they are responsible for the non-compliance equally as it could be for the importer also. So they are basically a bridge between the customs and the importer. uh, this is their role. And in regular manner, we can also say that they are a regular feedback channel to the customs about the how the trade is being run and what difficulties are being faced. So
Yeah,
this way, a custom broker work. Yeah, thank you.
that's a great answer. Thank you, Priti. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Paula?
Oh, yeah. I was thinking that in Europe, after the reform of the custom code, the role of the custom broker changed a little bit because basically we distinguish in Europe between the direct representation when the broker operates on name and on behalf of the economic operator, and the indirect representation, so on its own name and on behalf of the economic operator. And basically, after the reform of the custom code on 2015, the situation changed because the role of the custom broker changed. We can say that, I mean, it was said that it was the end of the sort of monopoly regime because there was the opening to many new figures potentially enabled to present the custom declaration on behalf of the economic operator. And so I was curious to know how it works in Canada and in USA, because there was and there is still a huge debate in Europe about this.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think that many countries are in different phases of how customs brokers are used. So in Canada, customs brokers are legally authorized to represent importers and exporters to facilitate the movement of low-risk goods across the borders. So in our Customs Act, the Canadian legislation, licensed customs brokers, so you must receive a license from the government, are empowered to act as an agent of the importer, which means they can account for and secure the release of imported goods. And that includes paying any duties or taxes that are owed. So very similar to Paula, to what you said, and Priti, as you as well. So in Canada, they're licensed by the CBSA and they need to have a qualified officer within the business that has passed a knowledge exam to show that they're not just somebody off the street. They have some knowledge and experience to be able to give guidance about the decisions the broker will make. What happens in Canada is that brokers enter into what is called a general agency agreement, or sometimes it's called a power of attorney, which means it's a contractual relationship between them and the importer to say, yes, this customs broker is authorized to represent me to the Canadian Customs Organization. Some of the other functions that customs brokers do, and it varies country by country, and the legislative arrangements are a little bit different for each. So in Canada currently, they can post financial security to allow the release of goods prior to payment. So those are called customs bonds normally. They, as both of you mentioned, they pay the duties and taxes that are owing to the government of Canada. They can provide advice to importers about tariff classification or issues related to valuation and origin, so the application of free trade agreements, for example. They develop and maintain product databases. So what that means is if you have an importer client that imports a whole bunch of goods that are in the electrical industry, for example, a customs broker can do the work of classifying all of the goods that your company is likely to import. And that streamlines the process of importation because they have a ready-made library of classification determinations for you to use. They can also work with the importer and with the government to file ruling requests, so advance rulings about how a particular good should be classified. They can file refunds, appeals, drawbacks of duty, and remission applications. They can provide information on in Canada, the federal and provincial tax obligations that are related to imported goods. They can provide some guidance on how Certain shipments could be better routed or sourced from countries throughout the world on behalf of to benefit the importer. And they can also assist with arranging warehousing, international and domestic transportation of the goods. And finally, I guess in Canada, they can also be responsible for the maintenance of records. So under our Canadian legislation, in order to be considered a resident or an importer in Canada, you have to maintain your records in Canada. Now, we do have importers who are not physically based in this country, but they do have a requirement to maintain records here. So many customs brokers will provide the service of maintaining records at their physical office location, so that the importers can have a physical Canadian presence for record keeping possibilities. And sorry, I've just seen the comments in the chat. Gustavo, you said in Argentina, the customs brokers are individual, not companies, and they aren't mandatory, but the majority of companies use them. And I think that's very similar to the Canadian situation. So Canadian importers are not obliged to work with a customs broker to clear their goods for release. Like most other members of the World Customs Organization, Canada abides by the WCO's revised Kyoto Convention. So Chapter 8 of the Convention's General Annex specifies that importers can have the choice of transacting business with customs either directly, that is on their own, or by designating a third party to act on their behalf. So even though the use of a customs broker is not mandatory, in Canada, more than 90% of goods are cleared using the services of a broker. The decision about using or not using a customs broker is for many companies similar to decision-making about using an accountant. So a large corporation may have the money and resources to establish their own in-house financial department, but small and medium-sized enterprises may choose to entrust their finance requirements to an accounting firm so they can focus on their core business. So similarly, for large importers, let's say the Walmarts and the Costcos of the world, for example, it's more cost-effective and efficient to establish their own in-house customs brokerage capacity. For small and medium-sized companies, it might make more sense to use a customs broker. This is also the case when there are complex permit or reporting requirements for the goods being imported, such as oil and marine vessels for which the price can fluctuate frequently. When importing is a business necessity rather than the core focus of a company's operations, it makes sense to let the experts handle the complexities of getting goods into Canada and ensuring the correct amount of duties and taxes are submitted. Just looking at the post here, Avani, yeah, so that you said the context is the same in Sri Lanka. They carry the authorized signature on behalf for importers and exporters, but it is mandatory to have a customs broker to import or export commercial cargo. And Umberto, you said in Peru, it's commonly stated that customs brokers serve as assistants to the customs public function. So, sorry, Avani, is it mandatory to use a customs broker in Sri Lanka, or do you have the choice?
If you're doing a commercial cargo, otherwise it's like passenger baggage or something like personal effects. You can like come by your own self. Like we are trying to make it more simplified to facilitate like a single person. But if it's like commercial cargo, it's like mandatory to have a customs broker. Yeah, because it sometimes speeds up the stuff because the customs brokers are kind of experts on the area of harmonized codes and like classifications. Otherwise, if the companies come and like try to consult customs themselves, it's more like time for them to understand the procedure, filling the documents, like even though it's in online form. So we use like it's the mandatory for the commercial cargo, the customs broker. Yeah, at the moment it's there like that. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I know. Some countries had it as a mandatory basis and kind of were able to grandfather that legislation as the revised Kyoto Convention came into effect that said, if you want to sign on to the WCO convention, you need to make it not mandatory. But I can see from both sides why it makes sense. Certainly from a customs administration point of view, it is more efficient to work with people who understand what they're doing, I suppose, rather than an importer who's trying for the first time and making many mistakes and that type of thing.
Yeah, we follow it because we are a very small country. It's quite faster, but yes, we do facilitate for the passenger baggage, and because they're like single time, they're not doing it frequently, and we use a very simplified way for them. So kind of is a mixed method, but it's like if we are going to like quantify the commercial cargo is like much higher, so I will say like it's mandatory to have.
Yeah,
Yeah, we have the both options, but not for the commercial cargo yet.
Okay. Yeah. And so in Canada, if you're talking about goods that are coming with a traveler, for example, those wouldn't fall into the realm where a customs broker would assist. It's people are generally on their own to assist with that. It's more in the cases of large shipments or for us, e-commerce is sort of a gray area, right? On the one hand, you have people purchasing things by themselves.
And same here, the gray area, the e-commerce, yes, still we have that problem. Yeah, we do.
Yeah, in Canada, we don't necessarily have we call it casual importations or non-commercial importations, but then you have commercial importations, which in the past you would clearly understand as large shipments. Now with the era of e-commerce, where also companies are importing their supplies via e-commerce, everything's a little mixed up. I think we're still trying to figure that out. So, any other comments or questions on this part? Great. So customs brokers are not the only trade entity working to bring goods into Canada. Does anybody know what some of these other entities do within the supply chain? I'll give you some hints and you can jump in if you have other experiences. So the carrier is the person or company that transports the commercial goods. The carrier is responsible for, in Canada, they're responsible for providing cargo and conveyance information to CBSA. A freight forwarder arranges for the transportation of commercial goods to Canada with a carrier, and they might separate a shipment of goods at a customs sufferance warehouse in Canada on behalf of an importer or the person receiving the goods. So basically that means freight forwarders can arrange for goods to come in consolidated shipments. They will arrive at a sufferance warehouse where they remain under control, and they can be split out into smaller shipments to go on to multiple onward destinations. So if something's coming in a large marine container, it could have many shipments destined to many different consignees inside it. And the freight forwarder is the one that will facilitate the process of getting that whole container to go to the sufferance warehouse and then have it sort of split apart into different shipments. Freight forwarders also have obligations to provide information to customs, and they build sort of upon the information that the carrier provides. So there's a multi-tiered process of documentation in Canada, at least. A duty-free shop, you're probably familiar with, that's a person that's authorized to acquire goods free of duties and taxes, but the condition is that those goods are only available for sale to travelers who are going to immediately export the goods from Canada. So these are people that are at the international lounge at your airport who can buy the goods because they're on an outward ticket to another destination. So the duty-free shop owner in Canada has to put forth financial security to cover off the duties and taxes that would have been owed had those goods entered into the Canadian supply chain. A custom bonded warehouse is a private facility that participates in Canada, the CBSA's Customs Bonded Warehouse Program. These operators provide secure facilities in which companies can store goods duty-free for up to 4 years until they're released, which is when the duties or taxes become payable, or until they're exported. One of the biggest users of customs bonded warehouses in Canada is Amazon. And another big user is the importers of our alcohol products. So like in Ontario, it's the Liquor Control Board of Ontario. So they will import vast quantities of wine and alcohol at rates that make sense to them, or when there's good harvests of whatever wine there is out there. Those goods will just be stored in the warehouse, in the bonded warehouse, and they're released into the market on a flow and on a pace that makes sense, where they can maximize their profits for those goods. So the duties and taxes are only paid when the goods leave the bonded warehouse. Until that time, they just basically sit in storage until they're released to be sold, or until they are re-exported. We talked a little bit about a sufferance warehouse. That's more of a short-term facility where goods can be examined, repackaged in some circumstances, and then released for sale into the Canadian market. Another key part of the whole process are financial security providers, or sureties. These are the folks that are providing a customs bond or another form of financial security to guarantee that owed duties will be paid for goods that are imported into Canada, even when those goods are not paid at the time of entry. So in Canada, we have a program called Release Prior to Payment. What this means is when you've put up a certain amount of financial security or a bond ahead of time, the goods can be released for entry into Canada, and the Canada Border Services Agency basically says, yes, we know you're good for it. We know you're going to pay the duties and taxes on your monthly account because you've put up some financial security to protect against any debt. There's plenty of other entities that are involved in the supply chain: accountants, trade lawyers, customs trade consultants who can give advice about to importers about whether they're eligible for certain refunds or drawbacks. Third-party logistic providers are increasingly incorporated into the mix. And these are not always distinct entities that only carry on one line of business. So in Canada, we are increasingly seeing firms that are offering at least both customs brokerage and freight forwarding services as a means of maintaining or expanding their client base and to remain competitive with large multinational firms that are buying up family-owned brokerages in order to access the Canadian market. In comparison to our southern neighbor, the United States, we are a very small market. We are about 42 million people compared to their 400 plus million people. So we may not be the first choice of destination when when companies want to expand their operations, but it can be seen as a very cost-effective mechanism if companies are expanding globally, including into the US. They will look for opportunities to expand into Canada because we are essentially right next door. And so this kind of brings us to the key takeaway number 2, which I wanted to just emphasize. Maybe it's obvious. There are multiple roles in the supply chain, and each of them has different objectives and definitions of success. So an efficiency for one part of the supply chain might represent an impediment to another part or a potential for lost revenue or market share. When customs organizations say they have consulted with the trade, so to speak, or with trade chain partners, it's important to remember that there's unlikely to be a single point of view coming from these various industry sectors. All trade chain partners value seamlessness, confidence, and consistency in the trade environment. However, they may have different ideas about what that looks like. Of course, this makes the process of consultation with industry extraordinarily complex, as meeting the demands of one part of the supply chain might mean disappointing another. However, customs can't use this complexity as an excuse for turning a deaf ear on feedback that does not align with its expectations or desired outcomes. Sorry, Gustavo, yes, to go back just briefly, the difference between a bonded warehouse and a sufferance warehouse. So in a bonded warehouse, you can maintain goods in storage for up to 4 years and under Canadian legislation. And you don't pay any duties or taxes on those goods until they are released into the Canadian market to be sold. So you can basically stockpile a large quantity of goods in your bonded warehouse. It remains there duty and tax-free until you take a portion of it out and decide to sell that in the domestic market. Sufferance warehouses, by comparison, are sort of temporary warehousing and processing facilities where you can do certain things with the goods before they are released into the export market or into the Canadian market. So, for example, you could bring in, let's say, big batches of products, for example. So let's say you brought in a crate load of a certain pens or something like this, but you wanted to repackage them into smaller amounts for sale in the domestic marketplace. The sufferance warehouse is where you would do all of that activity, that repackaging, that relabeling. Canada Border Services officers have access to both of those facilities because in both cases, the goods have not been released for entry into the Canadian marketplace. It's basically a difference of the time frame and what you can do within them. So in a bonded warehouse, you can stockpile and store your goods duty and tax-free until you're ready to sell them. In a sufferance warehouse, it's really a temporary stop where you're going to sort of take a bulk shipment and package it into smaller packaging or formats for sale in the domestic marketplace. Many big companies like the Amazons, the large grocery chains, the liquor stores, they will have their own bonded warehouses just to store their inventory so that they can buy when it's cheap on the international market and hang on to it and sell it when they can make the maximum profit in the domestic market. And so Avani is custom bonded warehouse in Canada just to store goods. Yeah. So the bonded warehouse, I don't believe you can do any other operations like repackaging and that sort of thing. But I'm not an expert on bonded warehouse, so I don't know if there needs to be another movement when you're ready to sell the goods domestically. Does that make sense? Happy to dig into it a bit more if folks are not clear on that one.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to know, is there any other operations going under that bonded warehouse schemes?
Yeah, to my knowledge, you can't do sort of the relabeling, repackaging type of thing in a bonded warehouse. It's more of your storage facility for the long term. Sufferance warehouse is more where the work happens to repackage and reformat, relabel. Like oftentimes in Canada, as a bilingual country, we have labeling requirements that are French and English for many of our products. So a sufferance warehouse might be where you would add an additional label that would have the French and English text to make sure it was compliant with Canadian marking requirements, for example.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So just to get back to, complexity, obviously there's lots of variety out there in the trade world, and not everybody does the same job, and everybody has different expectations about what makes them efficient and what makes them profitable. And so that can be really hard for customs organizations because they want to consult, of course, but consulting with that many different parties who have that much variety in their interests and objectives can be super challenging. The other part of that is that, in that complexity, it can be tempting to sort of find what you think is your main market or your main client or your main outcome and focus exclusively on that, and sort of ignore or not give sufficient attention to the other parts of the industry or the other parts of processes that could have a significant impact on what you're trying to do. So, from a customs perspective, it's really quite dangerous to focus on one industry perspective and set of processes, as there might be other supply chain processes that will have a significant impact on the implementation of a program or initiative if they're not given sufficient attention. So as the WCO says in its guidance on customs business partnerships, implementation of new customs policy or law may be impeded, if not completely thwarted, without the support of the affected business community. We have unfortunately, I think, have some good examples of this in the CBSA's overemphasis on the requirements of individual commercial importers during the development of CARM, the CBSA assessment and revenue management system. So the CARM system was developed with sort of single discrete commercial importations in mind, in which one shipment equaled one set of electronic documentation. So the consultation and data collection over the years focused on how individual importers of commercial goods, or their customs broker agents, of course, could use the CARM system to account for and pay duties and taxes owed for individual commercial shipments. Unfortunately, this ignored two quite significant communities in the Canadian importing community. And it's resulted in significant friction between the CBSA and those communities as CARM moves closer to implementation. So first off, we have participants in what's called the Customs Self-Assessment Program, or CSA. So these are companies that import multiple shipments of the same commodity on a daily or weekly basis. So in exchange for meeting a number of stringent security, systems access, and payment requirements, CSA importers are permitted to account for and pay owed duties and taxes on a monthly basis instead of on a per transaction basis. Failure to meet payment deadlines, for example, results in removal from this facilitative program. So CSA importers are extremely vigilant about accounting and payment obligations in order to maintain their privileges. An interesting question, Umberto, about free trade zone operators. So we don't have free trade zones per se in Canada. I think you're right. It's not part of the Canadian experience. We have sort of free, I don't think they're called free trade zones. It's like trade facilitation zones, so to speak, but we don't exactly have the same experience as some other countries in the world where you do have those free trade zone operators. So I would say yes, but I can't speak particularly to that experience. So to go back to the CSA program, in Canada, the automotive manufacturing industries in Canada and the US are very closely intertwined. what happens, I mean, Lauren would have this experience from working at the Windsor ports of entry, which are right across the river from Detroit. What happens is that certain components are produced on one side of the border, say in Canada, they're moved across the border into the United States, where they're taken to an automotive manufacturing facility, where they're incorporated into a larger portion of the vehicle, and goods can move back and forth across the border in various states of assembly many times during the production of a given vehicle. So we have production of certain components occurring on one side of the border and assembly occurring on the other. So automotive manufacturers are very heavy users of the CSA program because they have multiple shipments of the same commodities moving between the same importer and consignee on a daily basis. So for example, if you have a company in Windsor, Ontario that produces the mechanism for your windshield wiper operators, they may export once or twice per day or per week batches of that particular technology that allows your windshield wiper to operate. That's going to go across to the United States. It's going to be incorporated in whatever car they're manufacturing at that point. And then it could be that that partially manufactured mechanism has to come back to Canada for the next level of finishing or the next level of incorporating technology. So it's exactly the same commodity moving several times per day or several times per week between exactly the same importer and consignee. In that context, it's not efficient to have to fill out separate paperwork for every shipment because you would have hundreds of submissions of exactly the same documentation, just with a different date or a different time on it. So the automakers in particular take advantage of the CSA program because it just offers some efficiencies in terms of how much paperwork they have to submit and how often. Another thing to remember in Canada is that the big automakers are also very influential in Canadian government and political circles. And it's not uncommon to see the head of one of the big automakers call the president of the CBSA directly if they see traffic backing up on the Ambassador Bridge between Detroit and Windsor, which impacts the cross-border flow of their vehicle components. So knowing that, imagine how the automotive industry reacted when it learned that this new system, CARM, was going to do away with accounting and payment efficiencies that they were used to having with the CSA program. So with CARM, the automotive importers would no longer be able to submit bulk reporting on a monthly basis. They'd have to file each transaction individually as it occurred, which would result in a steady stream of payment due dates rather than one monthly bill, so to speak. And they would also result in a never-ending series of accounting corrections to be submitted, since commodity quantities in the automotive world fluctuate with each shipment based on how the production facility is operating. So, for example, the automakers might not always have an accurate count of the items in a given shipment until it's ready to depart from the facility. It's very much a just-in-time or real-time type of industry. The CBSA had been so focused on its proposed solution to streamline accounting for individual commercial importers that it had failed to understand the negative impact the solution would have on another large importing community, the CSA folks. So for the past year or so, the CBSA has been working with the CSA community to try to resolve the situation through workarounds and alternate manual processes. But many CSA importers are still struggling to understand why the benefits have been eroded and the efficiencies reduced in their importing context. There was a similar challenge that emerged with respect to the express carrier industry. So as I mentioned, CARM is based on the premise that shipments are accounted for on an individual basis. The way the system assigns liability for duties and taxes is by tying each shipment to an individual importer's business number, or BN. The express parcel industry doesn't work that way, though, as many of you have knowledge of through your own e-commerce sort of industries. Many thousands of packages, each potentially destined to a different importer, are moved together in one truck or one marine container or one air cargo pallet as a single shipment. And the information about each parcel is included on a consist sheet, which is a single document submitted to customs to cover all of the goods in the consolidated shipment. The courier reports all of the goods in the shipment using their own BN, both for efficiency and because many of the importers of the goods don't even have a BN. They're consumers like you or I who purchase something on Amazon or eBay or Alibaba. From a consumer's perspective, the transaction is complete as soon as we pay for our order online, and we need have no further concern about how the goods are imported once we pay the e-commerce vendor. However, if the CARM system was implemented exactly as designed, then each e-commerce importer would need to obtain a BN or some other form of personalized transaction identifier. And they would need to provide that to the courier to be included in the courier's report to the CBSA before their goods could be released to enter Canada. The courier could not submit a consolidated consist sheet, but would instead need to enter each transaction individually into CARM and have the duties and taxes calculated for each parcel in the shipment. For the majority of these shipments, there would be no additional duties or taxes owing due to the low value and the non-controlled nature of the goods. Think of what you or I generally buy off of Amazon or Alibaba or any of those online platforms. It's nothing of concern from a threat perspective and is not usually something that incurs a high level of duties or taxes. But the additional administrative burden alone would add significant time and resource requirements in order to process each shipment, meaning the goods would accumulate in warehouses until the courier had retrieved all of the information required to submit the reporting and accounting to the CBSA. This would also drive up the cost of shipping, since couriers would be unlikely to take on this additional work without compensation. So much for Amazon Prime and your $9, $10, $20, whatever you pay monthly to ensure your goods are shipped quickly and without impediment. So as they've done with the CSA importers, the CBSA is now looking at workarounds and exemptions for express or parcel carriers so that the implementation of CARM does not bring e-commerce importations to Canada to a halt. But the question remains as to how the CBSA could not have seen the potential impacts on e-commerce while the CARM solution was being developed. The express couriers themselves have been consistent, active participants in CARM consultations for close to a decade. It appears that either the CBSA misunderstood the express parcel industry and how it works, or they did not fully appreciate the feedback they were receiving from that community, or they choose to discount it because it did not align with the technical solution they intended to develop. The result is extra work for all involved to try to manipulate processes to counteract the negative effects of a technical solution that does not align with business needs. Any questions on that? No? Great. In the next few slides, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I kind of have a small question, but I doubt whether I'm correct or wrong. When I'm here, I was like trying to kind of observe the movement of these e-commerce platforms because it's like quite like frequent here. So I noticed in Amazon itself, like when we like try to order something, like after the price, it like automatically shows like how much I owe for the Canadian like duties and other levies. So yeah, I think they kind of have some kind of implementation. I don't know because I have like never studied it as like a customer side. I will like just observe, which I haven't seen in my country, to be honest. So yeah, you know, is that an initiative or something like that? I just don't know yet. That's what I'm thinking.
I think every country struggles a little bit with how to deal with e-commerce, and it's not always embodied in the national legislation. So Amazon is it's at least two parts. I'm probably oversimplifying this. There's Amazon, the company, which will generally, when you want to order something online from Amazon, it will just give you the final price. And so that will include they'll just embed the importation duties and taxes into that price, and you'll see one price. But they also have what are called Amazon Marketplace sellers. And so those are other companies that have sort of made an arrangement with Amazon to sell their goods using the power of the Amazon vendor platform. And so what you'll often see there is that it looks like you're buying the goods from Amazon, but you're actually buying the goods from a third party. And so those duties and taxes or its shipping fees or whatever else they want to include are often shown as extra. So in those cases, you're buying from someone who is not Amazon, but who is affiliated with Amazon. Some other countries have gone completely to what's called a vendor-based platform model, which means the vendor, whether it's Amazon, Alibaba, anybody, they'll just deal with the duties and taxes at the back end, and they'll just give you one single price, and you won't ever know how much it actually costs to ship the goods to your country of destination. You won't actually know the duties and taxes that are applied to your goods, which is great for simplicity's sake. It's not necessarily great in terms of visibility on how much you're paying in terms of marked up fees and where prices are being padded with additional things that are called shipping or duties and taxes, but are not actually those. So yeah, in the Canadian experience, it's particularly with Amazon, you're seeing sort of two separate streams. You're seeing the Amazon as the vendor, and then you're seeing Amazon Marketplace, which is other companies that have used Amazon as the way to communicate with a broader potential population of customers. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Perfect. Any other questions or comments? Okay. In the next couple of slides, we'll just look at a few other sub-issues or challenges that arise from a diverse customs and a diverse trade trying to work together. So you may be familiar with the saying that time is money. Well, time really is money in the customs trade relationship, but the impacts are different on various parties. In my experience, a misunderstanding of how government and industry each deal with time and resources is a key source of friction in the customs trade relationship. So let's start with the customs side of the equation. If a customs organization wanted to implement a new initiative, let's say a new way for importers to securely customs, for example, what would be some of the internal considerations involved in that process? Like what are the things that customs would have to think about when wanting to launch a new system?
May I?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Thanks. So I think before introducing some system, there has to be one trade notice or public notice that has to be placed. It has to have some advanced date of implementation, and of course some of the training session which customs needs to do for, of course, for the hand holding and making the things clear how it will be working. So these are, and there could be one fourth advanced thing which I understand that sometimes we just amalgamate some act notifications are issued and we say we will implement. There could be a positive way to do it. We can put a draft notification for implementation, which is more open for this. That is another way to do it. So these are the things that we expect.
Sure. Yeah, and those are all great points. I think there's even issues that start before that. If even if you're in the planning stage, you need to start thinking, how long is it going to take to implement this initiative? Like, do I have the right laws and regulations in place to permit the initiative to occur, or do I have to amend my laws to make it legal to do it the way I want to do it? Is there a source of funds for the initiative? Do I have the human and technical resources in place to implement it? Do we need to procure technology from outside the country? And are there domestic market or national security issues related to procurement? In Canada, for example, we have what's called the Investment Canada Act. And so there are certain rules around how foreign businesses can interact with Canadian businesses to supply certain strategic goods. And then do we need to involve an external contractor or a consultant to help with implementation? These are all things that you need to consider from a government perspective before you even get started. It's just in the planning stage. And each of the answers to each of those questions comes with its own timeline. So seeking approvals within government involves multiple levels of consultation and usually some back and forth as increasingly senior levels within the organization seek more data or analysis to support their decision making. For the CBSA, for example, it is one department within a ministry that has 5 other departments within it. So some projects can be approved internally, just within the CBSA, but many large-scale projects have to be approved by the Minister of Public Safety or the Treasury and the Treasury Board, which is the main financial control department, and they need to be included in the annual federal budget process. In Canada, at least, this may be different in your own countries. To ensure responsible handling of government funds, many large projects are now subject to what's called gated funding. This means that a certain amount of money is released to the department to take the project to a certain stage or to meet specified objectives. Additional funding to complete the project is only released once the department has demonstrated that it has met those deliverables. So if you think of any project you've ever dealt with in your life, whether it's private sector or government, things very rarely go exactly according to plan. Delays in procurement or securing contractors, or even delays in reporting on your progress can all impact a department's ability to meet the stated objectives, and thus can impact whether the project proceeds according to schedule or even if it proceeds at all. Many large-scale initiatives in government are expected to be delivered on timelines of 5 years or longer in Canada, which also makes them vulnerable to changes if the elected government or the implementation vulnerable to changes in the elected government or the implementation of fiscal control initiatives. So if a new government is elected and decides that an in-progress initiative is no longer a priority, the initiative could be delayed or stopped permanently. So in Canada, we are not in an election cycle currently, but we are sort of heading into one with the next federal election planned for the fall of 2025. So as we gear up for that election cycle, we start hearing from the leaders of various political parties about what they would or would not do to put Canada on a stronger financial footing. And some of those proposals do involve cutting back on government resources, cutting back on government programs. And there have been cases in the past where entire government programs have simply been ended as the result of either an election promise or as part of a broader initiative to tighten the belt, financially speaking, for the federal government. So these types of things can all impact how government projects proceed, how long they take, whether they turn out as they were originally planned, and many other things. So the timelines in particular are quite acute when it comes to information technology initiatives. It can take 2 or 3 years in Canada to secure the approvals and funding for an IT initiative. So it's likely that the technology that was approved at the beginning is outdated by the time the approvals and funding are in place. Imagine if you needed to get a government approval to buy your iPhone 12. And by the time you finally got the approval to buy your iPhone 12, we would probably be on iPhone 15. So it's similar in government for most IT projects. The government machine, so to speak, is generally not nimble enough to keep up with to keep pace with the changes in technology that it would like to adopt. So even approvals for commercial off-the-shelf technology products involve lengthy procurement approval processes, which means that the government will very rarely be implementing an ideal cutting-edge IT solution. Now, we had, who is our friend? David from our digital agency in Vancouver. Have you had any experience dealing with government contracts or having to negotiate with government partners in the digital space? No.
Limited. Like for example, with the UN, I've had some exchanges, but on a very small scale. And that was a very large feature, is that it was done on a small scale and limited, such that we could be very nimble and quick. Had it escalated and required larger involvements, it would have stretched out many, many years.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see sort of in government, some things that want to be nimble sort of get so far and then stop, and they are, I guess we call them de-scoped, right? It's like we got so far that we could quickly, and then we don't continue any further because either the time ran out, the money ran out, the technology changed, and so you sort of end up with like half implementation in the digital space.
That's a good point, is that sometimes by de-scoping, we can be quick and implement a small portion of a larger project, but then funds for the subsequent steps may not be available, or other challenges can occur. So it's seems like there's no easy answer.
No, absolutely. And at times, I think in my own experience, government has attempted to be nimble by saying we're going to launch a pilot project, which sort of implies sort of, smaller, short duration, limited focus. And often the pilot project becomes the permanent project because there is no further momentum to continue on.
I've had that happen on more than one occasion. Yes.
Perfect. I say perfect, but I don't mean perfect. That's not ideal, but it is unfortunately a reality, especially when governments do need to do their due diligence and go through the necessary steps to ensure they're getting value for money and that they're being transparent with taxpayer dollars about how those are being spent. But those processes do come with the cost of maybe not being as advanced or as nimble as we would like to be. Are there any other issues that we sort of need to consider from the customs side of this if we were trying to implement a big project? Okay. Well, let's take that same issue, that same government initiative, but let's look at it from the trade side of things. So if you're an importer or a customs broker and learned that the government was planning to implement a new way for importers to securely transmit information to customs, what are some of the questions you'd be asking yourself? I'll get you started on this one. I know I've asked you a lot of questions. So my first question would be, when is this happening? Why is it happening? I just got used to the old system, probably. This is probably something that's building on something that's not yet completed in the government processes already. Is it optional? Do I have to make changes to my own systems? How much are those changes going to cost? How does this impact my clients or my product offerings? How does this impact my bottom line? Is there someone else who can take care of this for me? I'm busy. While a government may consider a project's progress over a span of 5 years or more, private sector companies need to consider how those changes will impact them in the short term. They can't afford to run at a loss over multiple years, and they need to ensure that they will continue to generate profit amid those changes. So a 5-year trajectory for government seems absolutely normal, and it could easily extend to 7 years, 8 years, or 10 years. For a private sector entity, not having that certainty about when this is all going to be over and when the new process will be implemented is really, really frustrating and very unnerving, I think, from a company perspective. Companies need to consider if they have the appropriate staff and the staffing levels in place to operate during the transition period and after the new initiative is in place. They need to determine if they're going to have too many or too few resources after go live to impact their own bottom line. So these concerns become even more acute in the context of other industry changes that are happening at the same time, such as the trend towards amalgamation and foreign ownership that we discussed briefly a few minutes ago. So if you're dealing with a new government initiative that's IT based and it's probably going to cost your company a lot of money, and at the same time you're potentially being bought out by a large multinational, or you're merging with another firm in order to increase your market share or stabilize or expand into a new business line, there's a lot of volatility there for your company, and it's easy to become very concerned and conservative about what decisions you actually need to make in order to keep your business profitable. Customs brokers in Canada often speak of what's called the race to the bottom, as brokerages offer lower and lower fees for their services in an attempt to retain existing clients and attract new ones. So when the profit margins are already quite slim, the idea of investing to meet government requirements can seem very overwhelming. This is one of the reasons why trade chain entities are often reluctant to support government modernization proposals until they're absolutely sure that they are going to go ahead. What the government can sometimes perceive as industry dragging its feet is actually a sense of serious concern within industries that they're going to invest time, money, and resources to support a government project that will never come to fruition, or that will be implemented late, or that will be implemented in a way that is significantly different from what was proposed. And that goes back to what David was mentioning earlier, where they've worked on some small scale projects, but larger than that, there's a real risk that things are not going to manifest as intended. David, go ahead if you have additional comments.
Yeah, I thought I'd add too that a scenario we also experience is that we could get funding for a pilot project or the project itself that's quite new and innovative, and there's a lot of excitement around that innovation. However, there's almost no budget for maintenance after it's been launched, or it's not as sexy, so there's not as much granting or funding available for refactoring or improving that product once it's been live. So that's also a distinction we see a lot.
For sure. And and I don't want to be crass about it, but I mean, in government, your sense of vulnerability, like as though you're going to lose your job if a project doesn't come to fruition, it's not really that strong. The government jobs are generally, at least in Canada, quite stable. On the private sector side of things, there's a real vulnerability there. Like, jobs are at stake. Like, we can't forget that within a private sector company, there's also likely to be personal considerations as part of the senior management's decision-making process. So businesses, of course, are expected to turn a profit. And so many senior leaders have their own compensation packages tied to the company's profitability. If a company needs to invest significant resources to align with a new government requirement, and the implementation of that project is delayed or even terminated, there may be significant impacts on a company's profits. It's not unrealistic to say that people within the company would lose their jobs if they are unable to successfully deliver on a project, even if the reasons that they can't deliver have nothing to do with them personally. So divergent perspectives on timelines and urgency is one of the key points of irritation between customs and trade. Each is operating within its own constraints and priorities, and the misalignment between them generates friction that is made all the more acute because time is money, and there's a significant amount of money at stake for both government and industry when timelines are not met. Paula, I see you have your hand up.
Oh, yes, thanks. Just if I can make a general remark. Well, what you said about stability of government job is of course true. I mean, government jobs are meant to be stable jobs. But I think I experienced in these years just living in an administration that had many, many reorgs, maybe too many reorgs in a few years, that middle management, for example, higher management, managers are quite worried about the fact that a project, how can I say, cannot be realized, cannot just um, just complete its process because it's considered a failure in a manager career. And so this is still a sort of paradox because, of course, there is this perceived stability, but there is also a sort of perceived instability due to the fact that maybe there is a change in national politics, and so the projects change again and stuff. And middle management is quite, feels precarious in this fact.
Yeah,
and
that's
this
absolutely
feeling quite diffuse.
That's an absolutely fair point, Paula. And I should not have oversimplified, but you're right. Like there is that sense of vulnerability. And there's also for individuals within government who are on who have career objectives or career ambitions, working on a project that didn't go well is not a great thing either, right? That has repercussions on the individual. It has repercussions on the team that worked on that project. So you're absolutely right. There's repercussions on both sides. All the more reason, I guess, to try to get the collaboration worked out so that nobody is in that, that vulnerable position of feeling that their jobs are in jeopardy because it's something that didn't go well. And sorry, does anybody else have other comments there? Perfect. So one final takeaway, and this is fairly common sense and not at all particular to the customs and trade relationship, but it's surprising how easily this concept gets lost in the rush to confirm that consultation has occurred, or in the English slang term to say to tick the box of confirming engagement with industry. We're going to talk a little more about communications issues in the second half of our seminar when we discuss best practices for effective customs trade collaboration. But for now, I'll summarize the issue by saying that most parties like to be consulted with rather than talked at. Communication issues are also very much tied to those misconceptions we discussed earlier about customs and trade, each being one cohesive block with a single viewpoint. If you're talking at a group, it's easy to fall into the mindset of assuming that since you have informed the group of your perspectives, they have all received and processed the information in exactly the same way. Customs and trade representatives are equally guilty of considering the other party as a single entity with one point of view. So unless you provide the opportunity for perspectives to be exchanged in return, you will miss important nuances and divergences from that cohesive view. Effective communication is hard work, and it becomes harder when the consultation methods involve large groups of stakeholders. For example, some of the CBSA's consultation sessions with trade chain partners included 200 or more individual participants. Another Canadian department holds periodic supply chain consultations that involve 500 plus participants in an MS Teams session. So in those circumstances, it can be hard for a range of divergent views to get sufficient airtime because there's simply not enough time available, and also because individuals may be reluctant to express perspectives that might be unpopular in front of such a large group. It's also really challenging to manage from a logistical perspective. Often the end result is talking at rather than consulting with, simply because the format of the meeting allows for few other options. Have you had any experiences that are more effective engaging with specific groups or communities to ensure more effective communications? Do you have any processes, for example, that you think could be put in place to ensure that the full range of views is heard? No, that's no problem. Oh, sorry, David, I
Yeah,
see you.
can I
Yeah.
share the experience? Yeah. So India has some 17 large ports. Some 9 to 10 are ranking in 100 also. And there is a mandate of government that there has to be quarterly meeting, customs complaint facilitation committee, and one is the participatory government agencies, which also comes on the board with the customs along with the trade. And this is how we engage to the BCBA is the body, Customs Broker Association, and other trade bodies like the freight forwarders body and shipping lines, and they all participate in that meeting on quarterly basis. The minutes are circulated to everyone, problems are raised, and this is how we work. So many things, goes layer by layer.
And do you find how many people are in those meetings?
So yes, this is important to know that Mumbai itself, Mumbai Custom is one of the biggest customs in India, and some 1,000 trade members are there in Mumbai Custom itself, and some 50 would be taking part managing to those associations. 50 to 60 would be taking part in one meeting.
Wow.
And they represent their point, and agendas are forwarded in ahead of meeting, which are taken on the discussion when meeting is taking place.
Wow, that even 50 people is a lot to manage in one meeting.
Yeah. In a physical meeting, there are always 50 to 60 people, and the body is always represented by more than 1,000 people, because Mumbai is one of the biggest place where there are big body of Customs Broker Association.
Right.
And of course, the Shipping Line Association is also there. And there are so many other stakeholders association which takes part in such meetings.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you have probably a larger volume of participants than we do, but even here, I find it quite diverse for sure. Excuse me. So anybody else? Yeah, Camila, for sure. Consultative surveys is a good way to get input from folks. It's not two-way, but if you can take the results of those surveys and provide feedback, that's definitely a useful way of gathering information from large groups of stakeholders. I'm going to do, just before we head off onto a break, I'm going to show you some videos about CARM. So this is, as I mentioned earlier, CARM's a multi-year initiative that's intended to streamline accounting and payment of goods imported into Canada. It was started in 2010 and has yet to be fully initiated. So full implementation has been delayed at least 4 times. Oh, sorry. About number 3 and number 4. What are the process? Gustavo, I'm just reading your comment here. Major challenges. Okay. What are the processes where times can be improved in Canada? The major challenge to communicate to the customs agency. So that's an interesting question. And maybe, I mean, we can talk about this a little bit more at the end of the session as well. Timelines in terms of the customs side of things, I think the customs is very much bound into the processes of the larger government process. In my experience, what happens often is more along the issue of communication. It's not that the timeline needs to be changed so much, but that the communication about the timeline or the communication about what's happening occurs too late. So it's once decisions have been made and once decisions are basically ready to be implemented. And so that creates an irritation with industry because either they haven't been given enough information or advance notice to factor those decisions into their own business cycles, their own budgeting cycles, or they don't feel that they've been given an opportunity to feed into the process at all. So I don't know that necessarily there's much that can be changed in the timelines. Businesses will operate according to their business cycles, and governments need to operate within the timeframes that they have for seeking approvals and for implementing. Where things fall down is the communication side of things, the communication early, the communication often, and the communication consistently. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the second half of the seminar. I think what we'll do is just to give my voice a bit of a break, and also to just give you some exposure of what happens in Canada when things don't go quite as well as they should in terms of customs and trade consultation. We're going to take a look at where some of the dialogue is currently with respect to the CARM initiative. So I did tell you about how it had been started in 2010, yet to be fully implemented. It's currently planned to go live in October 2024. The relationship, I think, has been deteriorating quite a bit over the last few years, to the extent that the industry associations, including my own, started to go into the sphere of politics and elected officials to try to get more attention about what was happening with the CARM project, because it was felt that the CBSA wasn't really listening to what industry stakeholders were saying about the system not being ready to go, about the system not being able to address the needs of importers. There was concerns about technical deficiencies with the system, and the consultation or the engagement process had deteriorated to the point where industry really did feel like it was being talked at rather than consulted with. So unfortunately, the shift in approach meant that things went into the political sphere, and it's a way of achieving change. It's not necessarily the most productive way of achieving change. So I thought maybe I'd just share with you a couple of videos which relate to Canada's study of the CARM implementation process. In Canada, we have Parliament, which is our main government house, and the Parliament establishes committees that are the mechanism that the Canadian government uses to learn about issues in more depth so it can report back to the rest of Parliament. So in March 2024, the Parliamentary Standing Committee on International Trade heard from witnesses and received written submissions from government and industry. The committee has demanded that the CBSA provide more than 50,000 documents explaining the timeline of the CARM project, the spending decisions, who was consulted, and how along the way. To our knowledge, the CBSA hasn't yet provided these documents, but it's likely that there's translation issues and other reasons why the documents have not yet been provided. So I'm going to show you excerpts of the session that involved 3 CBSA officials as witnesses on March 19th, which was followed 2 days later by testimony by 6 industry representatives. The point of these videos is not to make you an expert in CARM. I just would rather you focus on the language and the tone that is used. The he said, she said approach is sort of evident, in my mind, evidence of a broken customs trade relationship. We should never have gotten to the point where testimony before a parliamentary committee is used to point fingers like this. And you can hear how that messaging is exploited for political purposes during the committee members' exchange with the CBSA representative. So it's impossible for effective collaboration to occur when this polarized mindset is so firmly entrenched.
In the federal government, and we invest in our people and our knowledge.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks to the witnesses for coming today. So I guess just a rundown of what heard here today. 14 years ago, your department was given $370 million. You have spent 438 million. You're approved up to 526 million. 182 million of that has gone to Deloitte. History shows there's 200,000 importers that have dealt with Canadians that have imported into Canada. Currently, only 56,000 haven't. Only 24,000 have enrolled. I guess you're using 56,000 as the current number, but that still leaves about 144,000 potential customers. I think you would agree that they're still potential customers, even though historically they've maybe not imported for a while. And then you say you're satisfied that you got value for money. You also say you're 75% of this thing works. Again, color a skeptic on this side. We've seen ArriveCan, we've seen Phoenix system, which is in the billions of dollars spent. And now you're putting a blackout period before the program to go from April 26th to 29th to May 13th. I suspect you're even going to have a significant more a higher volume of importers wanting to log on to this. I think you guys are in a tremendous amount of trouble here. I certainly don't, I guess, agree with your optimism that everything is going to go smoothly. There are a number of organizations asking for what your contingency plan is. I think you've heard it from a bunch of people around this table here. So I think at the end of the day, would you support a full audit of CBSA contracting from the Auditor General of the CARM project at this point?
I'll come back to the Auditor General in a second. I just again want to correct the record in relation to the 80,000 and the 200,000. There are 80,000 active importers, 56,000 of whom are registered, who represent 80% of commercial business. The deadline for them to be registered is not May 13th. It's 6 months beyond that. And there's an additional 6 months if they choose to use a broker BN. In terms of the 75%.
So I guess on that,
So-
sure.
so
Like,
I-
are you pleased then with how that's going? That seems like it's not going so great.
Sorry, I just want to come back to the OAG. I would always welcome.
Well, I think he picked up on something there, so I want to follow up on what he picked up, and he can go back to what he finished on.
That he's trying to answer.
Well, I think he picked up on something, so I don't want to waste my time, Chair. So are you satisfied with what it seems like this is not going well in terms of enrollment?
I'm very satisfied with the enrollment progress. We would welcome an audit by the Auditor General if they choose to see fit. We have a rollback plan in case there is catastrophic failure. And the reason the blackout period was extended was feedback from stakeholders. We find ourselves in a bit of catch-22. We had a 10-day blackout period and we wanted to roll over for 10 days. Stakeholders were nervous. They thought that's not enough time. We extended it. And now we're getting feedback that 16 days is too long. And so we do feel a little bit of in a catch-22 where there's a request from stakeholders in an effort to be responsive. We act on it and then we're criticized for acting.
I think with all due respect, like I think you're hearing from stakeholders because again, this going back for 14 years, like there's obviously not a comfort level that this is going to go smoothly. So when you come here and you say that don't worry that everything's going to go fine on May 13th, and if it doesn't, we'll figure out what happens then. If I'm an importer at this point in time, like I would be very nervous, and quite frankly, the reputation of Canada is at stake with when we start dealing with issues like this in trade. They'll just look somewhere else to go. So I don't think the optimism that you brought to the committee today necessarily is reflected with a lot of the stakeholders that we're hearing from.
So I'm going to show you one more video, and this is from the industry side of things. So the way this worked is the committee had appearances from government on March 19th and then industry stakeholders on the 21st of March. So this is just sort of the other tone. And again, I'm not asking you to become an expert in CARM, but just rather to hear the language around how each side talks about one another, I guess, is what it's. This isn't polite government discourse anymore. It's a lot of he said, she said, and pointing fingers and that type of thing. So, right.
Thank you, Madam Chair and honorable members of the committee. My name is Candace Sider, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Board of Directors of the Canadian Society of Custom Brokers, or CSCB. I'm honored to share the views of Canada's custom brokers concerning the implementation of CARM. Custom brokers are licensed by the CBSA and act with the legal authority on behalf of importers and exporters. Every year, custom brokers handle more than 90% of import transactions for Canada's 227,000 importers. We ensure accurate duties and taxes are submitted for billions of dollars worth of goods each year. Our success in facilitating trade depends on access to technology and processes that keep goods moving. The CSCB and other trade chain partners have been providing input for more than a decade to ensure CARM functions to keep goods flowing while not unduly burdening traders. It was meant to be a technological solution that would modernize the border and revenue collection by making it easier for traders to interact with government. Unfortunately, the CBSA's approach to CARM implementation does not reflect or address the concerns that we and others have been raising. Furthermore, we heard several statements by CBSA Executive Vice President Ted Gallivan on Tuesday that we feel requires clarification. During his testimony, Mr. Gallivan stated that CARM implementation was delayed from October 2023 until May 2024 because the trade community was not ready. It is true that custom brokers and importers are not aligned with CBSA's view that CARM is ready to go live May 2024 in its current state, which, to be frank, has a myriad of deficiencies that need to be addressed prior to going live. Our members are concerned about the impacts on smaller and infrequent importers, especially due to the onerous registration process. They're also frustrated with the lack of support from CBSA, including long response time for help desk issues and dispute resolution. We experience new issues daily during system testing. CBSA has advised that some of the key issues and defects will not be resolved before CARM goes live in May. For example, system testing revealed defects in essential processes like the calculation of duty and taxes. Automated calculations appear to be based on fundamental misunderstanding of how processes like duty remission work. It is not acceptable for Mr. Gallivan to state that the errors result from trade simply calculating duties and taxes differently from CBSA. In the test environment, our members purposely entered incorrect duty rates to see if CARM would detect the errors. CARM did not detect the error and accepted the inaccurate calculations. If these defects are not addressed, this will result in inaccurate revenue assessment and collection by the government and will amplify the revenue leakage problem that CARM was supposed to address. Mr. Gallivan's testimony on Tuesday also demonstrated contradictory messaging from CBSA that contributes to uncertainty for importers. On the issue of financial security, Gallivan advised the committee that importers would only require $5,000 in security to have goods without payment of duties and taxes. However, what he didn't tell you is that CBSA has been advising the trade community for at least 5 years that the minimum security amount would be $25,000. He also didn't tell you that the draft policy guidance shared with the trade community in the past 2 weeks stated the minimum bond amount would be $5,000, but that policy guidance was later adjusted to read $25,000. The lack of clarity on important issues by CBSA is creating confusion and uncertainty for custom brokers and their clients. Similarly, Mr. Gallivan also advised the committee that CBSA had several layers of contingency planning if the May 13th go live does not go as planned. He referred to one contingency plan as a rollback, which means a return to existing systems. Mr. Gallivan's testimony is the first time traders have heard of this possibility. We have been told for close to a decade that CBSA must turn off existing systems to allow the new CARM functionality to work, and that a big bang approach to implementation was the only option for CARM. As such, custom brokers and importers have invested millions of dollars in reprogramming their own systems. Once trade begins the cutover to CARM, a rollback to older systems will not be an option. Canada cannot afford to implement an IT system with key deficiencies that will impact cross-border flows and force manual processing and workarounds to keep trade flowing. Traders need a functional system where the CBSA has addressed all design flaws to ensure trade continues to flow and revenue is collected. With our lack of confidence in the current solution, we recommend a full postponement of the go live until at earliest October 2024. We welcome the opportunity to support this committee in its study of CARM, and I would be pleased to answer any questions. Thank you.
So this is a system that's not even launched yet. In Canada, we have a long tradition of having parliamentary committee scrutiny over systems that are launched incorrectly or that cost a lot of money. If you have experience with the Canadian context, ArriveCan is the most recent one that has gotten a lot of headlines. Before that, we had Phoenix. But CARM is a system that's not even launched yet. And already we have committee appearances where government is is making statements and private sector is trying to refute them. So I guess for me, this is not the way collaboration is supposed to work, I guess, quite simply. You shouldn't be getting to the point where you're having to get in front of providing witness testimony in front of elected officials to portray your side of the story. I see, David, you popped on the screen. Is there anything you want to say? Yeah.
Watching that testimony made my spine shiver, because that's such a sign of things have gone so wrong. In my role at our firm, most of what I do is about people, to make sure that everyone is aligned as we're going along. And that's the only way to prevent that from happening, because as soon as it gets confrontational like that, it's really difficult. I'll also add that we worked with someone, an agency, or we worked with another group, and our primary contact was someone who was really well credentialed and really nice, but not competent in IT. And they left that group and went to work on this project you just referred to.
Lovely. Thanks for sharing that. For me personally, because I've worked both sides of the fence, as it were, with respect to CARM. I was with government for many years as it was going through its process of being developed, and I now work on the private sector. I find this just so sad and so discouraging. There's just so many good, knowledgeable people on the customs side and on in the trade communities who have valuable expertise to contribute to solving the problems that are facing CARM or any other issue that comes up. But unfortunately, the collaborative process has deteriorated to the point that the CBSA no longer communicates with the trade community via the former channels, and including like trade chain partner working groups and other mechanisms. So as a result, traders are often left to speculate about what will or will not happen with respect to CARM implementation. We understand now it's happening in October 2024, but there's been no further details. And speculation, as we all know, supports the development of conspiracy theories and one-sided views, and it sort of further perpetuates that us versus them mindset. So for CARM or any other customs trade initiative to be successful, Canada needs to be able to move beyond the current polarized approach. I'm just going to go back to sharing my presentation. So let's see here. So that was good. This is a great quote from the WCO, which is in their customs broker guidelines. If you'd like to do further research, it just talks about the importance of information sharing. And if we're not doing it well, customs will not have compliance. Initiatives can't be launched. We need to partner together. That's essentially the gist of it. There's no other way to make it successful. And I think those videos show quite clearly that when we don't collaborate and when we don't come together with a true intent on mutual understanding, you see the broken sort of situation that now exists with CARM. So given that, and given the background of where we are sort of in the Canadian landscape, I was really excited to see the WCO's theme for 2024, which is customs engaging traditional and new partners with purpose. Last month, I was really fortunate to participate in meetings with WCO Secretary General Ian Saunders, and I really appreciated his focus on the purpose part of engagement. Mr. Saunders emphasized that we, customs and trade collectively, need to be able to demonstrate progress and results where our engagement occurs. So collaboration needs to be focused on leveraging communication channels and relationships with a focus on efforts that increase seamlessness, confidence, and consistency in the trade environment, things that could, in his words, change the state of the practice on a day-to-day basis. So in the first part of our session, we talked about some of the challenges in the customs trade relationship. Let's spend the next 30 minutes or so talking about how we could make the customs trade relationship more effective and more purposeful to change the state of the practice of cross-border trade on a day-to-day basis. Of course, if you'd like to explore this topic in more detail, there are links to a number of supplementary resources in your course material, and you're also welcome to reach out to me at any time if you have an issue or an idea that you would like to discuss in more detail than we have time for today. So if you read the background material for this session, you're going to recognize a lot of what we're going to discuss in the next few minutes. We're going to use the words consistent, regular, and transparent an awful lot. Whether engagement is informal or it's structured, like the National Committee on Trade Facilitation model that we're going to discuss shortly, the foundational element of successful customs trade collaboration is regular, consistent, and transparent communication. So as our friends at the WCO have noted, regular consultation and discussion between customs and business will help reduce anxieties and apprehensions on both sides and will afford traders and border officials an opportunity to discuss the most efficient and effective approaches to achieving regulatory objectives. The establishment of a regular engagement and consultation process is usually the first step and a prerequisite to setting up a tangible partnership between customs administrations and businesses. The WCO adds a number of other keywords to the three that I've emphasized. They note that regular consultation and engagement will support consistency, harmonization, transparency, predictability, fairness, automation, and efficiency in customs and business processes. It's a pretty impressive list of expected benefits. They also point out that a successful customs business relationship must have the elements of trust, respect, open-mindedness, mutual understanding, appreciation of each other's requirements, two-way communication, cooperation, sharing of information, transparency, consistency, and most importantly, a commitment at all levels of both parties, from top management to the operational level. It's easy peasy, right? Let's not forget that this regular, consistent engagement needs to include a wide spectrum of viewpoints that could involve other government departments, trade bodies such as chambers of commerce and business associations, small and medium enterprises, academia, and non-governmental organizations. Regardless of the format that customs trade collaboration takes, it should have a few foundational characteristics. The first is a commitment to listening to understand. I think this is essentially one of Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, if you've ever seen that book come out over the past 30 or 40 years. Mutual understanding results when each side is prepared to listen to one another's point of view and to give enough time and space for those perspectives to be shared and to not come to the engagement with a predetermined option about or opinion about what the other party values or expects. It's basically the opposite of the single viewpoint and talked at orientations we discussed before the break. The next point is to follow through on commitments and action items. This is just like it sounds. If you say you're going to do something, then do it. If circumstances change and what you promised is no longer possible, report back on the situational change as soon as you can and offer an alternative solution. If you've committed to something verbally, follow through by putting it in writing. These obligations should be the same for customs and for trade. If the trade community says it's going to provide data to help customs understand the potential impacts of a proposed course of action, there needs to be follow through on that commitment. Two-way communication and commitment needs to be truly bidirectional. The third, sustain momentum. A kickoff meeting with no subsequent meetings is kind of like a first date without a callback the next day. It might have been fun, but what was the point? To ensure that collaboration maintains momentum, consultative mechanisms should have the following characteristics. They need to have consistency of participants. Otherwise, you can't have continuity from one meeting to the next. You need to have collaborative agenda setting instead of one party telling the other what they're going to be told or talked at about. Regular requests for input and responses to that input when it's received. Regularly scheduled meetings and inclusive and cordial discussion. And finally, there needs to be a monitoring and reporting on progress. So Peter Drucker famously said, what gets measured gets managed. And while I'm not in favor of the widget counting approach to collaboration, where each meeting counts as a so-called win, even if nothing was accomplished, I still believe that governance and reporting are important parts of any effective collaborative relationship. So in the near term, reporting out on meetings and action items demonstrates that the relationship is active and has the structure in place to deliver tangible results. Over the longer term, a sustained commitment to tracking and reporting on the progress of the relationship helps to identify if tangible gains are being achieved or if the relationship is stuck in a cycle of forever talking about the same thing without achieving resolution on any important issues. Seeing this in writing in the form of minutes or records of discussion can be a helpful wake-up call to spur the relationship in a more productive direction, to change the state of the practice on a day-to-day basis, as WCO Secretary General Saunders has said. Are there other elements that you think would be absolutely fundamental in establishing an effective customs trade collaborative relationship? Feel free to jump in, anyone. Yeah, go ahead, David.
There is one element that I've experienced a lot, which is there's a power balance imbalance between the contractor and the client. And oftentimes there's this desire to please the client. Early on, it must be said that if there's an idea or a direction that's going to be a problem, to have to say that and make it really clear that that's not acceptable or that's going to be a problem and work through it and try to find a better way around it. sometimes I experience a lot of pushback on that, or even tension, because it's maybe one of those sacred things that the client has in mind. But to not say so will often lead to a bad outcome, such as the video you just pointed out, and so much gets invested, and you go so far down that road that it becomes a blame game. And I found actually clients will say to me, I wish you have told me at the beginning. I know you tried, but I wish you would have been more firm.
Yeah.
So just speaking from my own experience, that's so important, that at the start you must be honest, even if it's not acceptable or what they want to hear. It has to be done.
It's a good point. And it's a, clarifying those expectations on both sides is so important. Often when you start in a collaborative relationship, you have that, what's sometimes called the honeymoon period, right? Where we all love each other and it's a great partnership and we're going to achieve great things together. And so you just kind of gloss over or don't give a lot of light to the sticky points that are going to inevitably surface in that relationship. So when you have sort of the confidence to bring those up early, and sort of the trust in the relationship to say, yeah, let's talk about it early and get that sorted out, you're right. You actually do yourself a great service in the longer term. But Pretty, I think you came on.
Yeah. So I just want to add on the other points, almost complete there, but just adding one more point, like whenever we come up, there is no complete solution with anyone, any party, be it customs or the trade. So whenever we come up with some problem, we should come up with some constructive points, like if this is the problem, then what could be the solution? So this is what we expect from the trade side. And as well as you already said, that is Stephen's core is the listen to understand. This is one of the important thing that an authority must understand. It's not that you are blocked. So constructive ideas, constructive solution is something that we should look for from the trade side also, and from the authority side also. I think this is one important thing that we can do.
That's a super important point, Pretty. Often on the...
I would like to add one more thing. Like in conversation, we were seeing two of the videos. Anyone who is communicating their point should not be in a format of a press release or too formal, which blocks the personalities while listening. And I think those are the languages of letters rather than speaking. When we speak to someone, it should be more informal in terms rather than it being very formal or blameworthy. So that can also be avoided by either of the sides.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important what you said earlier about, coming forward with solutions or options. And often on the industry side, there can be a tendency to just be responsive, to say to customers, well, we don't like what you're doing. We don't think that's going to work, but without coming to the table with alternate solutions or what could be another way of approaching the situation. So it definitely takes investment of energy on both parts. It can't be a situation where one side simply receives the data and says, we don't like that, find something else. It has to be a partnership in finding solutions. For sure. Great points. Thank you. Anybody else?
No? Well, as some kind of a nutshell, I would say, being a customs officer itself, I believe that when we engage with the trade, since we are so fancy about law enforcement, we have to step aside of our ego of having this law and everything, and we have to as the other participants comment, we have to listen to them and understand. And also from the other party, like the trade, they have to be honest of their intentions. It's always the balance of compliance and facilitation. You have to be compliant so we can facilitate. So I just wanted to put it on the table. Yeah, it has to be 50-50.
100%. That balance of compliance and enforcement is so important in the customs world, and it's also important in the trade world because it impacts profit. And I think sometimes it's a matter of characterizing the impacts from the other party's point of view. There is no money to be made in the private sector by being non-compliant, because all you're doing is forcing customs to become more enforcement oriented in response, which means that everything takes longer, that there are more requirements placed on your shipments and on your documentation, and that ultimately erodes your bottom line as well. So it's a matter of looking at it from like, what is the perspective that benefits both parties? But that, as we said, takes a commitment to listening and understanding what's going on. That's great. Thank you, everyone. So on the next two slides, these are just some of the benefits of customs trade collaboration. These come directly from the WCO's Customs Business Partnership Guidance. We won't go through them in a ton of detail. They are pretty self-evident, I think. On the customs side, it allows for more informed policy making. It allows for confident testing of new approaches before having to enact them permanently in law or as a new program. It allows for fewer disputes and more efficient dispute resolution, enhanced security. On the business side, transparency and predictability allows for processes to be streamlined. The more things can be streamlined, the more there is the capacity to have your business be profitable, because you're not spending a lot of time being bogged down in alternate processes or worked around. There's also more capacity to be strategic in your decision making, including your investments in business, because you have access to information, you have predictability, you're not blindsided by developments in government. Here's some more. Sorry, this is so squished and stretched out. This reached the limit of my my PowerPoint adjustment capabilities. But most of these are fairly self-evident, I think. And they impact both customs and I think the larger trade community and government, as well as the larger trade community in the industry side of things as well. Are there any others in looking at this list that you would add in terms of benefits? One that I would add, just after having the experiences of CARM implementation in Canada, and which you saw in those videos, I would say one of the benefits of customs trade collaboration is protection against reputational harm as a benefit for both customs and the trade community. So nobody benefits when the public discourse devolves into us versus them narratives. And by and large, the public and the importing community just want trade to flow smoothly across borders. They don't want to know about the internal machinations of the relationship between the government and traders. They just want to know that it works. So an effective functioning collaboration mechanism between customs and the trade community helps ensure irritants can be identified and addressed before they become the topic of parliamentary committee scrutiny, question period, and trade podcasts. And I didn't show you some of the industry trade podcasts that have been produced about CARM, but so they run the spectrum of informative to inflammatory. And again, they're just sort of an example of what happens when that us versus them mindset is entrenched in the way that industry and customs are working together. So in terms of another way to partner in a more formalized way, it would be to establish an actual national committee on trade facilitation. So Article 23.2 of the WTO's Trade Facilitation Agreement requires each WTO member to establish and or maintain a national committee on trade facilitation, or to designate one of their existing mechanisms to facilitate both domestic coordination and implementation of the Trade Facilitation Agreement. So when the TFA was established, Canada chose to repurpose an existing committee to meet its obligation to establish an NCTF. Canada's Border Commercial Consultative Committee, or BCCC as we call it, fulfills in theory Canada's obligation under the Trade Facilitation Agreement, but the current manifestation of the BCCC is broken and it does not achieve its intended purpose. So, for example, the BCCC lacks balanced and collaborative participation by the CBSA and industry, and its meetings often devolve into perfunctory sessions where industry is talked at by the CBSA. Industry proposals for greater engagement in support of a genuinely collaborative approach seem to fall on deaf ears, or they're lost in the shuffle of changing CBSA co-chairs. And this is sort of a particularity of, I guess, working with a national government organization at its headquarters. With the CBSA, like many other federal departments, it's quite easy to move among departments, either to change jobs because you don't like where you are or due to promotional opportunities. As a result, leadership of industry customs groups like the BCCC often become sort of a secondary consideration amongst the movement of personnel. And there's a revolving door of people leading the various committees and subcommittees. So this makes it really difficult for an individual within CBSA to develop the expertise and rapport with the trade associations to really make effective or lasting change. It also sort of undermines trust on the trade side of things because they're not certain if the CBSA values its partnership with industry, and it lends the impression that these consultative forums are kind of like an afterthought rather than a priority. Now, I'm telling you all this, but I'm actually quite excited because earlier today I had a meeting with the CBSA Director General who's responsible for the BCCC, and the meeting was actually about how we can revamp and refresh the BCCC to make it more collaborative, to bring it back to its intended foundations as a true collaborative forum. So while I would say its current format is not optimal, it does seem that there is some goodwill there and some momentum to try to implement changes to bring that relationship back on a stronger footing. So I'm quite enthusiastic about that. And so it was just good timing in terms of this actual seminar. If we go beyond the CBSA context, both the WTO and the WCO provide helpful guidance to formalize customs and trade consultation in the form of an NCTF. And those are, of course, based on those words we keep reusing: predictability, transparency, partnerships, and the use of modern techniques and technologies. And then the WCO guidance in that context focuses more on how to implement at a practical level, like how to set up the actual committee, how to set the work plan for the year, how to establish the agendas and whatnot. The WCO identifies some preconditions for a successful and effective National Committee on Trade Facilitation. And so those include political will. The government needs to be behind the creation of an NCTF, and that includes at quite a high level. We need senior management commitment within the government organizations that are involved, mutual trust between customs and the trade community, transparent and open communication, engagement with diverse businesses, including small and medium enterprises, and clearly defined goals and objectives supported by time and resource commitments. So those all sound quite simple and easy, but are very difficult to implement in practice, particularly as we discussed earlier, when in an attempt to be inclusive, consultative forums include 200 or 500 participants on an individual call. It becomes very easy for those smaller voices to become lost in the larger voices or the stronger agendas that are represented by larger portions of that group. Now, in March 2023, the United States shared a document with the World Trade Organization community that summarized the 6 key principles for successful shared practices for NCTFs, which they confusedly called NTFCs, I think. In any case, those the principles were based on submissions by many other countries to the WTO, so they represent a good cross-section of the main features that could contribute to a successful creation of this type of committee. So you'll see the first one is a high-level political support for the NCTF with a clear structure to the committee. So in some countries, it was determined that these committees worked best when they had presidential proclamations or they were entrenched in legal legislative actions or government orders. In other countries, they suggested that having a very high level of official in charge of the organization was one way to guarantee success, basically because it's getting enough attention at the highest levels of government. In most cases, successful NCTFs had clear structures established at high political levels. This isn't necessarily the case in Canada, where we tend to have senior management within the CBSA, but no other government departments participating right at this moment. Occasionally, there will be guest speakers from other departments as needed, but no regular contributions, and certainly not at a very, very senior level. The next point, I guess I had sort of addressed just there: wide participation and representation by border authorities and other government ministries. So as I mentioned, in Canada, the BCCC is a CBSA-led committee. Occasionally, other departments will participate as guests to contribute on specific topics. The best practices for setting up these committees involve ongoing permanent representation by those departments that are involved in trade and the border. So in Canada, for example, we should have permanent representation from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, which is our primary agricultural enforcement organization. We should have ongoing involvement from Transport Canada, which deals with the movement of conveyances into and out of the country. And we should probably have ongoing permanent representation from Global Affairs Canada, which deals with the larger trade perspective for the Canadian government. The next one is private sector participation, which should be obvious after the 2 hours and a bit that we've spent together. So an NCTF needs to have active contributions by the private sector, good two-way communication, co-creation of agendas and priorities. The next one, communication flow. I think we've talked about that quite a bit. Bidirectional information sharing between government officials and the private sector is essential. Clear goals and priorities. I think this is where things often fall down, where we get stuck at the idea of, if we hold the meeting, that's the priority or that's the deliverable. We can measure success because we have met. But truthfully, to be effective, the meetings should be just one manifestation of the work that's being done together. There should be work done between meetings. There should be a shared work plan and priorities, and those should be able to be revisited by government and industry together and on a regular basis. And then the last one was just tracking, monitoring, and responsibility. I talked about this a little bit earlier. What gets measured gets managed. So if we're not keeping track of what we're doing, it's very easy in the context of an NCTF to just devolve into meeting for the sake of meeting. In Canada right now, the BCCC has a twice annual collective meeting schedule. So in theory, it's supposed to meet as a large collective in November and in May of each year. The May meetings and the November meetings were both canceled because the meetings were just being scheduled for the sake of being meetings. So there was nothing really substantive that was intended to be accomplished there. And so it's very easy for things to just fall by the wayside when there's no intent to produce specific goals. I'm going to wrap up here. I'm just going to leave you with a few more wise words from those folks at the WCO who seem to know what's going on in the world of customs and borders. And I'll just open it up if you have any questions. I don't have any further slides to share with you today, but I wanted to give you a chance to ask any questions, make comments, share any stories you didn't have time to share earlier. Ask me about my background, anything you'd like. Excellent.
I kind of have a question, but I don't know whether you can answer, because I have this doubt. In the World Trade Organization, the database of trade facilitation agreement database, there is some kind of a tool to see the progress of the implementations under the categories like A, B, C. Right. So last night I was trying to do some kind of a comparison, and I was I have never seen before. I tried Canada was my country, and I noticed it shows Canada is developed and it's 100%. So I was confused to see whether you have fully implemented it, or I can't see it through this portal. Oh, I was just in a doubt. I don't know. Yeah.
No, for the sake of reporting for the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement, Canada has reported that it has fully met its obligations. So the BCCC forum was used to meet the requirements. And so if you look at what are measured under the TFA, is that you have a structure, that you have regular meetings. There's a number of other things. So in theory, yes, Canada has met all of those requirements. Whether it's functional and effective is sort of a different set of measures, right? So yes, on paper, Canada has met all of the things it needed to do to meet the obligations under 23.2. If in terms of the opinions of the people who participate in it, those might, there's more that could be done to make it more effective.
Yeah, because we also found in my country, we have plenty to implement, but still when we comparatively study the first instance and the other instance, sometimes we have mentioned that we have implemented, then we realize there are some much work to do on that to be get it done fully operated in our experiences as well. So thank you. Your answer explains everything. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
And I think the other thing I'd say is just that once you you sort of report for the purposes of the TFA that you've met all your obligations, it's not as though the WTO comes back to you every year and say, are you still meeting your obligations? Is this still working? Like there's no review mechanism, right? So I think once Canada declared that it had 100% met them, there was no expectation that we would go back and say, oh, well, now this isn't working quite as well. Okay. And I see Gustavo, you've asked, what are the pros and cons of NCTF in Canada? Interesting things defined or implemented by the NCTF. So the pros, I think, are that we do have a mechanism to get together. And because the trade community is so diverse, if, let's say, all of the freight forwarders, all of the customs brokers, all of the small importers needed to find a way to engage with CBSA directly, but just for their own industry, it probably would never happen. You'd have to have 24 different meetings arranged with government officials. So it is nice to sort of have an NCTF as a choke point for that sort of collaboration, and it gives those folks who don't always have the ear of customs an opportunity to engage with them. Many smaller or less represented entities participate in the BCCC just passively as a way of receiving information. So that's beneficial for them, I think, if they don't feel that they're getting that sort of information from their trade association or whatever else the case may be. The negatives, I think, in my opinion, are sort of what we've discussed here, is like, unless there's that momentum and there's that true commitment to collaboration and goodwill, it can become sort of an exercise, a tick the box exercise. We met, therefore we have consulted, therefore that's all we need to do. And if that's the attitude to that meeting, it can sort of spread or ooze to other parts of the relationship between customs and industry. And that in truth, I think, is how we sort of gotten where we're at right now between CBSA and industry, but I'm hopeful that we'll bring things back on track. Anybody else? Well, if that's it, I thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate you listening and contributing your perspectives. It's been a pleasure to work with you for these last few hours, and I'll turn it back over to Emmanuel.
Janine, thank you so much. Thank you very, very much. Really, I so appreciate your lecture. I just want to point out a couple of things to all the fellows that are who have done management last week and who are going on to doing 3 courses this year and are trying to get their microcredit. When we look at management issues more broadly, we discover that partnership is a really important aspect, that it is completely underdeveloped in most parts of the world, that is highly sectorial, right? So you have some, as you can discover in the security part, you've got some partnership there. Now, Janine has talked to us about some partnership in trade and so on and so forth. But generally, when we try to think about who organizes the partnership in the management of border policies, we have no organizations that do this. And yet, it's a very important aspect. So this morning, we had a talk where you basically discovered the integrated border management, which are the kind of the modern tools of security management. You've learned about Canada this afternoon, about how the Canadian stakeholders basically are starting to organize. And I really appreciate Janine's your sheer honesty and analysis of the situation, because it is very hard work. One of the things that I highlighted last week is that we have the technology and we tend to stop there. We think that because we have the technology, everything else will happen. And last week, one of the things that I was saying is that with regard to COVID, for instance, only certain states have learned that they had to move their bureaucracies, their border bureaucracies, closer to each other and forward into more partnership across all the different functions of border management. And then today, we have a very clear echo of that situation for the situation regarding trade. So that's for all of you that are interested in the microcredits and are doing, either started last year or 2 years before and trying to finish the microcredits. I think that the piece that we've had today is really important, and I include this morning and this afternoon because you realize how wide the partnership can be this morning, right? In a way, this morning we realized that basically to work in Europe, where you have Canadian officials working in Europe, with sometimes up to 20 organizations and trying to coordinate control over trafficking and all of the malpractice that are existing there. Very interesting to see that, but also the disconnect, right? The issues with making sure that all of this is kind of a well-oiled machinery. And then you have the same echo when you look at inside Canada. I mean, the video that we just watched during the practicum, I think for me is so relevant. In my mind, it's like you have high-level officials, people who otherwise are really, in a way, very well thought through and know what they are doing, but they are so invested in their own perspective that they haven't yet realized that they are co-constructing, and I mean it this way, they are co-constructing the policy together. And so being too aggressive is actually counterproductive. And so I really, I want to point to this. I really appreciate Preeti's comment that, sometimes the positive comment, the positive outcome is really a very important step forward. In border security, as I was saying a little earlier, we have discovered that, you can institutionalize these things. One of the ways Janine is suggesting to us is to measure, to manage. I just want to close on this today because I'm thinking, what measure are you going to implement at home to make sure that these kind of partnerships develop and are properly managed and are taken seriously, right? Because that's a really difficult piece. We don't have much research on this, but for me, it's like an eye opener in terms of going even farther than some of the things I've been thinking about for the different institutes that obviously, the big picture for me is the partnership is fundamental, and I'm starting to understand this quite well. But through these different threads, we're actually pinpointing at maybe one day having best practices and being able to really help you implement them. And it starts a piece at a time, right? So it's the commerce and trade function, right? And then it can go to security function and so on and so forth. But obviously, they are really complex pieces. Janine, I just want to thank you very, very, very much for, agreeing to speak this year as the first. And I hope that you will agree to stay and work with the Borders and Globalization Lab for a long time, because after this lecture, I'm very impressed, and I think you've become one of the essential pieces of this week's Institute. So I'm extremely grateful for your time. And I'm also very grateful because I know that Christian Atare contacted you, and you agreed to speak also in their Border Security Institutes, where I'm sure that a lot of things are going to be said there that are really very, very interesting. So thank you. Please join me all. You can turn your cameras on and say thank you to Janine Harker for spending 3 hours with us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you so much. It was really enriching. Thank you.
Thank you.